Okay, so have you ever, like, been totally caught off guard by something? Like maybe a car backfires or, someone drops a pan and you practically jump out of your skin.
Oh, absolutely.
We're diving into that whole easily startled thing today. Why are some of us so much more reactive than others?
It's a great question. And, we often just brush it off as, oh, that's just how I'm wired.
Hmm.
But there's actually a fascinating mix of, well, biology and even our life experiences that come into play.
Right. Like, what's the deal with one day a dropped fork sends me through the roof, and the next day I barely even notice? So let's start with the basics. The good old startle reflex. You know how babies do that whole arm flinging, leg curling thing when they're surprised?
Ah, yes.
Mm.
The classic Moro reflex. And, it's not just a cute baby thing. It's actually a really important neurological sign that doctors look for.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it tells them that the baby's nervous system is developing like it should.
Huh. It's amazing how these reflexes we have as babies can kind of stick with us in ways we don't even realize.
Absolutely. I mean, think of it this way. The Moro reflex, it's like a superhighway in the nervous system,
Right.
right? It directly connects that sensory input, like a loud noise or sudden movement, to a rapid muscle reaction.
Okay.
So as we grow, that full-blown arm-flinging response, thankfully that fades.
Yeah, good thing.
But we still keep a milder version of that startle reflex. It's like that highway, maybe becomes a local road. It's still there, but a little less dramatic.
Okay, so it's not just me being silly. There's an actual neurological reason why a pan clanging in the kitchen makes me jump. But why are some people, like, seemingly unfazed by things that would send me through the roof?
Right, right. Well, that's where things get even more interesting.
Hmm.
One big factor is simply our genes. Just like some people naturally taller or have a certain hair color, some of us inherit a more sensitive nervous system. It's just how we're wired, so to speak.
So, like, my grandma who jumps at her own reflection in the mirror, that could be genetic.
Exactly. It's
Yeah.
totally possible that your family tree has something to do with how reactive you are, but it doesn't end there. Nope. Research actually suggests that even prenatal experiences could influence a person's, like, sensitivity to being startled.
Wait, are you saying that things that happen before we're even born can affect how jumpy we are later in life?
It seems that way, yeah.
Yeah.
Studies have found a link between a mother's stress levels during pregnancy, especially high levels of that stress hormone cortisol, and babies being born with a, let's say, heightened startle response.
So it's like our brains are already picking up on cues and adapting to our environment even before we're born. That's kind of wild. Makes you wonder about the long-term effects of all that, doesn't it?
It really does. It raises some, well, intriguing questions about the whole nature versus nurture debate when it comes to, our temperament and how we react to the world around us.
Mm. Okay, so we've covered that being startled is like this primal reflex, and that some of us are just predisposed to being a bit more reactive. But is it all just, predetermined, or can we actually do something about it?
That is the million-dollar question, isn't it? And the good news is that, yes, while we might not be able to change our genes or rewind the clock on our past, there are absolutely things we can do to kind of manage our reactivity and find a bit more calmness in, well, what often feels like a very chaotic world.
All right, so you're telling me there's hope for us jumpy folks. Tell me more.
Well, before we get to the solutions, let's unpack a few other things that might be making you jumpy.
Okay.
Like, let's start with something I'm sure a lot of us can relate to. That daily caffeine fix. You know how a couple cups of coffee can make you feel, like, more alert, maybe even a bit jittery?
Oh, tell me about it. Some mornings I'm practically vibrating after my second cup.
Right. Well, caffeine gives your nervous system a boost, making it more reactive. Now,
Neat.
imagine pairing that with not enough sleep.
Okay, I'm already feeling a little on edge just thinking about it.
Exactly. It's like you're constantly revving the engine of a car without giving it a break.
Mm-hmm.
Eventually, that engine's going to be primed for a burnout, right? Same goes for our nervous systems.
So even if I can't swap out my jeans, I can maybe skip that extra cup of coffee, especially if I haven't slept well. What else should I be paying attention to?
Good question. Let's talk about something you might not connect to being jumpy. Your thyroid.
My thyroid.
Yeah, specifically a condition called hyperthyroidism.
Hyperthyroidism. I've heard of it.
It's more common than you think. Basically, your thyroid, it's like your body's thermostat, controlling your metabolism. Hyperthyroidism is like that thermostat getting stuck on high, making everything run a little too hot.
So instead of just feeling warm, my whole system would be, like, on overdrive.
Exactly. It's like that 5 cups of coffee feeling, but without the coffee. This can lead to a bunch of symptoms, including feeling restless, anxious, and, yep, even being more reactive to noises or
Oh,
movements.
wow. Okay, so if someone's listening and they're like, wait a minute, this sounds familiar, what should they do?
The good news is hyperthyroidism is manageable, usually with medication. If any of this resonates, it's worth talking to your doctor.
That's reassuring. It's wild how these things we don't even think about can be connected to something like being startled easily.
Seriously, it shows how interconnected our bodies are. Speaking of interconnectedness, let's touch on another factor that might surprise you. Your heart.
My heart, I thought we were talking about being jumpy, not like having a heart attack.
Right, right. We're not talking about heart
Yeah.
attacks. But sometimes a rapid or irregular heartbeat, it can actually trigger those feelings of anxiety and make you more easily startled.
Wait, really? So it's not just that being startled makes my heart race. It can be the other way around, too.
Exactly. It can go both ways. Our bodies are complex, and sometimes those signals get crossed. The point is, if you notice a pattern of feeling extra jumpy, pay attention to any other physical symptoms you're having. Maybe talk to your doctor about it.
Okay, so we've covered caffeine, sleep, hyperthyroidism, heart rate. Anything else?
While it's always good to rule out medical stuff with a doctor, sometimes the root of our jumpiness is actually rooted in our past.
You're talking about past trauma, right? We touched upon that earlier.
Yeah, exactly. And it makes sense, right? Our brains are incredible at learning and adapting, but sometimes that adaptability can kind of work against us in a way.
Wow, yeah, it really makes you rethink, like calling someone oversensitive or whatever, doesn't it? You never know what might be going on under the surface.
Exactly. Especially when you realize that after a traumatic experience, someone's brain can basically get like stuck in this high alert mode.
Right, like it's always looking out for danger, even when there isn't any.
Yeah. And when you're in that constant state of alertness, it's no surprise that even the smallest things, like a sudden noise or whatever, could feel like a threat.
That's got to be exhausting.
It really can be, both physically and emotionally. And it's important to remember that PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, it's not just for, veterans or people who've been through war. Trauma, it shows up in many different forms.
Right, like it could be a car accident or a natural disaster, or even just like the sudden loss of a loved one.
Exactly. It's all about how our individual brains process and cope with those experiences.
It really makes you realize that everyone's fighting their own battles, you know? A little understanding and compassion can go a long way.
Absolutely. And thankfully, there are therapies that can help, like retrain the brain to respond differently and manage those really intense reactions.
That's good to know. But even if, we're not dealing with past trauma or anything like that, are there still things we can do in our everyday lives to, I don't know, feel a little less reactive?
For sure. One really powerful technique is mindfulness. Have you ever tried mindfulness exercises?
I've tried those meditation apps and stuff, but I'll be honest, I'm not always the best at keeping up with it.
I hear you. It's easy to let those things fall by the wayside. But here's the thing about mindfulness. It's not about like emptying your mind or becoming some kind of Zen master. It's just about bringing your attention to the present moment without judgment.
Okay, so how does that translate to not freaking out when the microwave beeps?
Okay, so imagine you're doing dishes, right? And you know that any second that garbage disposal is going to kick on with that awful grinding noise.
Oh, the worst.
With mindfulness, instead of just bracing yourself for that noise, you notice what's happening in your body. Maybe your shoulders are tense or you're
What?
clenching your jaw.
Oh, I know that feeling. My whole body tenses up.
Right. But instead of getting swept up in that, you observe it. You notice those sensations without judgment. Maybe you even take a deep breath. And that act of noticing, that pause, is where the magic happens.
So I'm basically pressing pause on that automatic reaction, that jump out of my skin moment.
Exactly. You're creating a little space, a buffer zone.
Hmm.
And over time, that buffer zone, it gets bigger. You notice those signals earlier, and you start to have more control over how you respond.
I like that. So it's not about never being startled. It's about learning how to, navigate those moments with more awareness.
Exactly. And the more you practice mindfulness, the more that awareness, it starts to show up in other areas of your life too. Not just with loud noises. You might find that you're calmer in traffic, you're more patient in long lines, you're more present during conversations.
It's like you're training your brain to be more adaptable, like building mental muscle or something.
That's a great way to put it. And just like with physical exercise, consistency is key.
Yeah.
Even just a few minutes of mindfulness each day can make a big difference.
This has been honestly eye-opening. I'm walking away with a whole new perspective on something that I just, figured was a part of me.
That's great to hear. It's all about staying curious. You asked, why am I so easily startled? And look where we ended up.
I know, right? We went from reflexes we're born with to the power of our own minds to change. And it just goes to show there's always something new to discover. So, to everyone listening, don't be afraid to ask those questions, keep exploring, and remember, you're not alone.